Light stays on? Yeah.
Good afternoon. We'll call the study session together. May I have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that. I thought that was Councilmember Selich. Councilmember Selich and Councilmember Daigle are absent.
Okay, thank you. The next item is clarification for items on the consent calendar. Mr. Rosansky?
None, thank you.
Mr. Kent?
I have two, Your Honor.
Okay.
Is that appropriate?
I've been called worse.
You're honorable?
I may be called worse tonight.
Okay. Item number 7. This has to do with the Reagan Memorial Commission that is being proposed. I just wanted to clarify that it is clear that council must approve any recommendation to rename a city property or facility, and that it's the intent that along the way the plans associated with doing so will come before council for final approval. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
The
so the-
final action will be that of the council.
The commission itself has no final authority
That's correct.
on that, other than to organize and execute the process.
Correct.
I had a question on that one also. I was just wondering if it was perhaps premature of the council to be considering a commission before the PB&R Commission has even done its work, whether we might be looking at it as assuming that it's already foregone or something. So that was a question I had.
Let me respond to that because it was my idea. There's lots of carts and lots of horses here. So what we need to do is to, first of all, solicit names for people who would want to serve on the commission, who would raise the money, who would pay for whatever memorial we design for the president. My thinking on this is that we should begin the solicitation now. His birthday is on February the 6th. We should appoint the commission. We should let PB&R weigh in on this. And then what we ought to do is not bring it back to the commission, to the council, but let the commission itself have an opportunity to get public input, to think about it, to decide what precisely the appropriate way to handle this is, how much it's going to cost, bring back a budget, and all of that, so that when the council considers this idea, it's a fully formed idea, and the community knows exactly what we're getting into. So that's the thinking on this, but we need to start somewhere. And in order to know that we have people willing to raise the funds and what such a memorial would look like, we need to get the commission going. Okay? Councilmember Gardner.
Yep, I had a second.
I'm sorry, second one.
On item number 8, the AQMD funds to be used to offset the CNG, the cost of CNG, yeah, the powered van, the Oasis van. It mentioned there was $425,000 in that account. Is it possible that those funds could also be used to help offset the cost of CNG trash trucks and other things, or how often do we delve into that account to actually use that money?
It's at council's discretion when you appropriate that money. The monies have accumulated from annual subventions that we receive from AQMD, and they could be appropriated for any purpose that mitigates pollutants in the air.
And so have we had, I'm not aware that we've had much activity using funds from that account. Is that the case?
Periodically, either for the electric vehicle program, we were using it to acquire electric vehicles, but when that program went away, there have been a handful of times that General Services has come forward to offset or mitigate a cost of a clean air program.
Okay. But the use of the funds in that account can be fairly broadly construed as long as it's air quality related.
It's reducing emissions, yeah.
Okay.
So trip counts or clean fuel vehicles.
Mr. Henn, if it were your desire, we could pull together like the last 5 or 7 years worth of expenditures from that if you wanted, if you're just curious and wanted to see that.
Just curious,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, yeah.
We'll do that.
And actually, Councilor Henn, we did use $160,000 towards the refuse trucks.
We did.
Yeah, so $40,000 apiece.
Thank you. Councilmember Gardner.
On number 3, it's my understanding, although it's not listed in the council changes, that the buffer zone for the exotics, the invasives, is actually in the proposed language.
Yes, Councilmember Gardner, that language is included in the zoning code draft that will be coming before you this evening.
Thank you. And on the Crone-Demar banners, number 11, we are going to have, when we bring the policy back, that will be an opportunity for others to comment as to how it's used. Thank you.
And just one quick question. I would note on item 6, we're proposing to close between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, consistent with what we did last year. And the estimated cost savings from dissipated leave by people who are using their leave during this week is, as I understand it, Mr. Kiff, $80,000 of savings?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. Are there anyone in the audience have a question on any matter on the consent calendar? Please come forward. Seeing none, we're going to take the items in slightly different order. I understand there's a request that we take the report on the customer satisfaction survey first, so let me open that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. As we go through the study session today, we will be trying to keep to a tight time schedule. So first up, as you mentioned, is the 2010 Citizen Satisfaction Survey results, and I'll introduce Chris Tatham with ETC to you to make the presentation. Chris will be going through a lot of material fairly quickly, so some of it he'll focus on, others he'll skip through. The satisfaction survey for the residents' interest is on the website. You're welcome to take a look at all that and learn more about it in that level too. So with that, Chris Tatham.
It's a pleasure to be here again. I think it was about 2.5 years ago when I was here last time. For those of you who aren't familiar with our firm, ETC Institute is one of the nation's leading market research companies for local governments. We've done work in literally 617 cities and counties over the last 10 years. And so I'm going to be making some comments in regard to what do the results mean in the context of how you compare to other communities, and that's the source of my comments. As far as today's presentation, I'm going to just kind of briefly recap the purpose. I think most of you are familiar with that, touch on the methodology, and then frankly just go through the findings. I'm just going to highlight some of the major findings, but I do want to go through most of the topics that were on the survey just so that one of these days when you're having a meeting, you might remember that you've got some data on that from your community for a various number of issues. As far as the purpose of the survey, these are the key purposes. One's just to assess how well you're doing delivering city services. What's new this time, we've allowed you to assess trends for how things have changed over the past couple of years. We provide comparative performance measures so you can see how you stack up to other communities. And then finally, help you identify priorities or things that you might want to emphasize as you move forward. These are the major topics on the survey. I won't read them all to you. I know most of you are familiar with them. What I'm going to do today is kind of just go through the major findings in each of those areas. As far as the methodology for the survey, we did exactly the same thing that we did essentially 2.5 years ago. We mailed the survey to a random sample of households in the city. About 7 days after the survey was mailed, we then started contacting those households by phone. Altogether, we had 727 households complete the survey. So as a result, the data you get is not perfect, but given the random sample nature of the survey, we estimate the margin of error to be about plus or minus 3.6%. So again, it's not exact, but if you did the survey 95 times out of 100, you should see similar results within about plus or minus 4%. In addition, we geocoded the home address of respondents. That way you're able to take a look at different things in different parts of the city, and you'll see that the maps are zoned by district or shaded by district, and I'm going to show you a few of those today. The other thing I just want to emphasize is that one thing that we assess to see whether or not the data really is representative is we take a look at the demographic characteristics of the people who respond to the survey. So in other words, it's a random sample, so if we get a good representation from the community, the demographics of the people who complete the survey should look like the community. We checked it with regard to age. It looks very close as far as the distribution to the recent census estimate. We had a fairly good distribution by gender, good distribution by income, and all in all, we thought that we have a very representative sample when we look at this year's sample compared to the one we did 2.5 years ago. However, I think, to be honest, want to just highlight some of the potential deficiencies in the survey that exist really with any type of research like this. One is we report the don't knows in the back of the report. But when you see charts and graphs, we've typically excluded the don't knows because, frankly, for every different item that's rated, a different percentage of people may have an opinion. Yes?
Okay, I never took statistics, but I noticed that in the report.
Right.
And so it brought into question, it isn't really the 97% of the total, it's
97% of those who have an opinion. So you may have one service, for example, fire and police, almost everyone have an opinion about those. Things like code enforcement and other services that not many people may be aware of, it may be a lower absolute percentage. And so I think
it's important to note that so we aren't talking about skewing results or something.
Exactly. The other thing I think is important to recognize is we did this survey in the late summer, so you had a slightly smaller percentage of seasonal residents than we did last time when we did the survey, I think in the December time period. So there may be some differences there. The percentage of people who were renters was about the same, but renters tend to respond less to these types of surveys. So if you're looking at differences based on people who own and rent their property, I'd recommend we do some crosstabs for you so you can see those differences and see whether or not it's an issue. The last thing is we use two methods for administering the survey, both mail and phone. All in all, it doesn't make a lot of difference, but it is subtle. And in fact, we've looked at thousands of surveys done over the last decade, and there is a slightly higher percentage of positive results, about 2.2% for people who complete the survey by phone versus mail. But given the distribution this time was essentially the same thing that we did 2.5 years ago, shouldn't be a major concern. But I just think it's important to highlight that. So with that, let me get into the major findings. The first thing we do is we want to really assess the strategic health of a community. I'm going to show you a number of charts, and you're going to see items rated in blue, white, and red. The blue indicate the positive results, the percentage of folks who had an opinion, who gave ratings of 4 or 5, who are very satisfied or satisfied. The white tends to be a neutral response, and we've tested this over time, tends to be people who think it's okay. In other words, they haven't had a real good experience or they haven't had a bad experience, but they at least have an opinion, and they tend to rate it neutral. And then the people who have a dissatisfied or a negative experience tend to rate things as 1s or 2s. And you can see overall, the city gets very good ratings in most of the areas. The percentage who were satisfied with the overall quality of city services was 89%. The one area you do have some dissatisfaction is how well the city is planning for growth. But when we look at how you stack up nationally, which I'll show you in a second, you're doing very, very well. The second point I want to show you here is how things have changed from 2007, 2008. When I was here last time, planning for growth was one of the items that I shared with you that I thought you could probably do better. Apparently, you've been working on that because we've seen an increase of 12 points in the percentage of folks who gave positive ratings compared to 2.5 years ago. So the community's perceptions of your efforts for planning have definitely gotten better. In addition, when you see how you stack up nationally, when I was here last time, you'll see 49%. Last time when you were at 49% last time, which was actually pretty much average when you looked at how you stack up to other California communities. When you notice this time you're at 61% for planning for growth, you're definitely setting the standard. You're 11 points above the average for California from a statewide survey we did about 1.5 years ago. And when you compare to yourself nationally, you're 17 points above when it comes to planning for growth. So you've definitely made progress there. The real highlight, in my opinion, though, has to do with the overall quality of services provided by the city, which is the second item there. In most communities, only a little over half of the residents surveyed give positive ratings. You can see that from the 56 and 57 for California, U.S. Here it's almost 9 out of 10. You have one of the very highest ratings in that area of all the cities that we've assessed. And one of the things that I just wanted to share with you is perceptions of quality of life are uniformly high throughout the city. What these maps show you is we've rated the mean rating from people who live in each of the different districts. If the mean rating was between 4.2 and 5, it's shaded dark blue. If it's 3.4 to 4.2, it's a light blue, and so forth. If you see orange or red, those would be areas of concern. But the perceptions of quality of life are high throughout the city. You can see slightly lower ratings with the overall quality of services provided by the city, but the entire city here is in blue. Most communities where I present this are just trying to have everything at least be in the neutral color, so certainly there's a higher standard of performance here. Overall perceptions of how well the city is planning for growth, those are also uniform, and part of this is equity and perceptions. In other words, are you managing things about the same throughout the city? And clearly it looks like you are when it comes to planning issues. When it comes to things such as quality of life, you'll notice that everything as far as a place to play, place to visit, place to retire, very little dissatisfaction in any of the areas that were rated. A real strength here happens to be the lowest rated item based on the positive is the city moving in the right direction. You'll see that 82, or more than 8 out of 10 people of those who had an opinion gave positive ratings for the direction the city is headed. And you can see compared to 2.5 years ago, that's up 9 points. So again, I think the fact that you've addressed some of the planning issues and some of the other items that were concerns in the last survey, I think are perhaps one of the reasons people think you are moving in the right direction.
I think 2 slides back, you know, it's worth pointing out that as a place to live, 98% of the people
Absolutely.
think it's a good or very good place to live.
Yeah, and a place to live, and not only that, place to raise children is actually one of the best indicators of overall quality of life, and you've got over 9 out of 10 people giving positive ratings on that. And when you see how you stack up nationally, you'll see that as a place to work, you're 32 points above the California average, 34 points above the national average. As a place to live, you're about 15 points above both averages. And you'll see at the bottom, as the city moving in the right direction, nationally only a little over half of residents give positive ratings in that area. Here it's over 8 out of 10.
On the category of as a place to visit, do we ask the residents that?
Yeah, that's what we asked your residents, so that's a front
Well,
function.
I think that
They
we're probably the worst judge of that.
Yeah. Well, then maybe your ratings are higher if you ask your visitors. And you just see that. I wanted to echo your comments on a place to live. Again, very good ratings throughout the city. As a place to raise children, slightly lower there, you can see in the one sector, but overall, good ratings. So I think you have a very healthy community when it comes to the strategic indicators. Now, when it comes to the city services we looked at several, we kind of broke it out to major services and then kind of specific services. First thing we look at are kind of major categories of city services, your libraries, your public safety services, parks and recreation, all the way down to traffic flow. And even we added kind of the quality and transparency of city's financial report this year. You'll notice none of the areas have significant dissatisfaction. Management of traffic flow is the area that people are perhaps the most negative about, but that's usually the biggest issue of a healthy community. In other words, one of the things that I've seen around the country is communities that perform well, the biggest issue they often have is traffic flows because people desire to be there. And so as a result, that's typically an issue that communities such as Newport Beach are dealing with. When you see how things have changed compared to a couple years ago, you're really to be commended when it comes to the effectiveness of city communication with the public. That's increased 10 percentage points among those who had an opinion compared to a couple years ago. And you can see pretty much just about all of the items that were assessed have seen some improvement. Not all of it was statistically significant, but overall I think that's one of the reasons you get ratings that you're moving in the right direction like you did. The other thing that we did, which isn't in the presentation, is we went through all the items that were assessed in the survey, and we looked at the mean rating this year compared to the mean rating for all of those items 2.5 years ago, and the composite index was up 5 points. In other words, you kind of across the board have improved significantly in most of the areas that you've seen that were assessed. When we looked at how you compare to other communities, one of your real strengths is your infrastructure. Nationally, it's less than half the people give positive ratings. Here it was 81%. Your employees are to be commended with their customer service, 8 out of 10 compared to a little over half in most other communities. Your communication was rated well last time, even rated better comparatively, and you can see all the areas. Even traffic flow, which is your biggest concern, still rates better than most communities in California and the rest of the country. And you can see when it comes to some of these specific services, public safety, parks and recreation, while you might see some pockets that are slightly lower satisfaction, we don't see any areas of neutral, orange, or red on any of these charts related to things like traffic flow. Your library system gets good ratings throughout the city. And interestingly, some of the folks who live closest to the ocean gave some of the best ratings for the maintenance of the city's oceans and bay beaches. In addition to just asking people their satisfaction, though, we also think it's important to get how important are different services to people. In other words, let's say that everybody was dissatisfied with the service, it might not make any difference if nobody cared. But if a lot of people care about a service, it's probably something to pay attention to, particularly if there's higher levels of dissatisfaction. And you can see traffic flow is the highest rated item, but collectively you really have 4 issues that kind of stand out. Streets and infrastructure, your maintenance of oceans and bay beaches, and then the overall quality of fire, basically your public safety services. Those 3 are almost equally important when we look at the percentages statistically. One of the tools that we use to kind of put this into perspective for you is called importance satisfaction analysis. In other words, what we do is we take a look at how important it was to people, and then we look at how satisfied they are to try to identify where if you had 1 unit of investment or 1 unit of time, where would you probably want to emphasize those resources over the next couple of years to sustain or improve your overall satisfaction ratings. And the way this works is we take the importance rating times 1 minus the satisfaction rating. So if importance is 0, this value is 0. Similarly, if the satisfaction rating were 100% and everyone were satisfied, this would also have a value of 0. As the number gets closer to 1, the issue is relatively more important. And you can see traffic flow is the highest rated issue. You can see it's then followed by continued maintenance of streets and infrastructure, overall transparency in your financial records, and maintenance of city beaches and your oceans and beaches and bays. What I want to point out, though, is we typically have 3 thresholds. We have a very high priority that's above 0.2. The next tier is 0.1 to 0.2. And then ideally, when you have everything in the medium priority, you essentially are at equilibrium. You're pretty much doing a good job in the things that are most important. And maybe if you're not doing as well, those things aren't as important to residents. And all in all, you have a fairly good distribution. If you're not quantitative, but you tend to be more of a visual learner, we've provided the same information in a quadrant. And what this does is as you go from left to right, that's the relative importance of the item. From the bottom to top, it's the relative levels of satisfaction. And the items that you want to kind of be careful of are the ones in the bottom right. If they get really far to the bottom right, usually indicates that there might be some opportunities to do better. And you can see traffic flow is the one thing that people here are likely to perhaps be a little more cranky about. But all in all, comparatively, I wouldn't panic too much about that because your overall traffic ratings are much higher than the national average. When it comes to perceptions of safety, residents feel very safe, particularly in their neighborhoods during the day. You'll see there's really no red on that chart. 90 altogether, you had 100% of people at least feel safe or neutral in their neighborhood. And you see this chart here overall, compared to the last year, generally the trends have been favorable. The one thing I think you've really done something, and I'm not sure what you've done, but people generally feel safer in your commercial and business areas after dark compared to 2.5 years ago. In fact, that's up 10 points, which was one of your significant improvements. In addition, when you see how you stack up to other communities, your overall perceptions, particularly of safety in neighborhoods after dark, is significantly better than the national and California average. And you can see that when we look at how people feel, how their level of safety in city parks, generally throughout the city, people do feel safe, but you can see folks who live a little further to the south, I guess, and east, are a little more safe or feel a little safer in parks than the rest of the city. When it comes to your public safety services, across the board, you generally get good ratings. The one area that has the most dissatisfaction is the frequency of police patrols in neighborhoods. You had about 1 in 7 people that showed some concern in that regard. When you see how things have changed compared to a couple years ago, generally most of the ratings have improved. Most of those changes weren't really statistically significant, but your perceptions of lifeguard services did improve 8%, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it for you on this chart. And when you see how you stack up nationally, 2 of your real strengths have to do with your crime prevention and your timeliness of police response to emergencies. You can see both are significantly better than the national average. You're also much higher when it comes to fire education and training programs. You'll notice that the one area you have the most dissatisfaction is the one area really more about average, which comes to frequency of police patrols. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do that more often. Some communities intentionally don't put their police in patrol so they can have better response times, so they tend to put their units out in arterials. But if the community doesn't understand that, sometimes you can end up having people concerned because they don't see police officers where they live. As you can see, as you move forward the next couple years, general emphasis of crime prevention is the top priority, and that's typically the #1 priority in most communities. You can see that frequency of police patrols was second, and when we put it into the important satisfaction analysis, you can see that that frequency of police patrols barely made that high priority category, but it is one area. If you want to try to sustain things, you may educate people about how you're deploying police.
When you were doing your district maps, I don't recollect, was there a distinction in this frequency of police patrols by area of the city?
Not
Clear
really.
distinction?
Yeah, in fact, when you look at the results, there are, I believe, a couple places that are maybe shaded light blue compared to dark blue, but from my perspective, that's all fairly
Nothing
good.
really stood out on
And so, in the key thing here with frequency of patrols often goes back to what I've seen, some of the analysis we've done is the response time. What's interesting is the response time is much better, so people who actually have an emergency or they know people who have, they feel police get there quickly. So it may not be a real issue for you. So I wouldn't go over and say suddenly we need to have patrols all over in all the neighborhoods. I think in some cases it's just even an education so that people know that the police can get there and tie that perhaps to your police response time perception, which is very high. In addition, when we looked at the important satisfaction matrix, you can see enforcement of traffic laws and that frequency of patrols in neighborhoods are the two in the bottom right. When it comes to facilities and recreation, none of the areas that were assessed had more than 10% of the respondents give negative ratings. The one item that typically is the most important is just taking care of your core parks, and you can see that was the highest rated. You know, this is a function of when I say importance of cities that do well in their parks and recreation facilities. That tends to be one of the key drivers. And you can see overall there was a kind of a steady increase in pretty much all of the areas of facilities and recreation that were rated. The biggest improvement you can see is outdoor athletic facilities was up 11 points compared to 2.5 years ago. We also saw notable increases in the quality of programs for seniors and the availability of city recreation facilities compared to a couple years ago. And when you see how you stack up nationally, when it comes to your programming issues, those are really some of your greatest strengths. Quality of programming for adults is significantly above, 31 points above California, 29% above the national average, and your programs for youth similarly have a major gap compared to other communities. And the programs typically are one of the things that keep people in your community over time. There's a lot of other factors, but one of the things that can cause people to be disconcerted if you have children or recreational desire in your community is the lack of programming from the local government or other partners in the community that can provide those services. We didn't have anything that really stood out as a major issue or a high priority, but you see walking and biking trails was at the top of the list. It had nearly double the value of programs for youth. And when we put things into the matrix, you can see it was the one item in the bottom right. Again, I don't see a major concern with walking and biking trails, but it is the one area you should probably continue to sustain your current levels of investment in as you move forward. And your utilities, generally very little dissatisfaction with your utilities. Residential trash collection, you'll see that over 90% of those who had an opinion, and most residents do have an opinion on that, gave positive ratings. What's important here is the intensity of the satisfaction. This is one where most people did have an opinion, and 2 out of 3 people had an intense positive opinion. And residential trash collection is an area for some of the cities that around the last couple of years that haven't had the resources to continue providing that at current levels have really struggled with. And you can see your ratings when you look at them compared to 2.5 years ago remain high. When you see how you stack up nationally in all 3 areas that we had comparative data, you ranked above the national average and the California average in each of them. And generally, you'll notice that the overall ratings for sewer and wastewater services were high, but as you get again to the south, I guess, and east, slightly lower ratings, though you have pretty good. And the other reason I guess put this chart up here is you might have seen earlier there were some other. Sometimes people believe that maybe there's one area of the city that's just more cranky than others, but when you look at the overall results, you can see that the ratings really probably are a function based on the conditions where people live. On code enforcement, you'll see on this one there's more neutral. Typically we find in code enforcement that people don't tend to be as opinionated. You tend to have more people who don't know on this issue, so you tend to see slightly lower total ratings, but this is again a function of the people who did have an opinion. But given the fact that that distribution was similar this year compared to 2.5 years ago, as far as the percentage of people who did have an opinion and so forth, you can see you have seen some significant improvement in a few areas, particularly when it comes to exterior maintenance of commercial property, enforcement of animal control, and the enforcement of residential property as well. All of those increased by 8 percentage points or more. And when you see how you stack up nationally, you're setting the standard both for the state and also for the nation in each of those areas. But one of the few areas we saw some non-blue on these maps, which is extremely rare for this type of presentation. You can see down there in the area close to the waterfront was more in the neutral rating, while the rest of the city tended to be blue, light blue.
So when you do this survey for code enforcement, do you exclude objects of code enforcement, people that were the subject of code enforcement?
Well,
How do you do that?
It's interesting that you find that. We've actually done a lot of research because a lot of communities, this has been the area they're trying to focus on. Typically, most people are not code violators. So when communities increase code enforcement, even though they get a lot more complaints, as soon as you step up code enforcement, a lot more people are calling in saying they don't like it, and it seems as if you're doing a bad thing. In reality, though, most of your residents are not out there breaking codes and violating ordinances, and you typically see improvements as you do it more. I mean, if you do it excessive enforcement, then you may see some residual negative effect. But my sense has been from doing a lot of these surveys that typically the better you enforce it, the better your ratings get, because most people aren't out trying to violate codes. There may be exceptions, but that's generally my interpretation. And this cleanup of debris on private property, that's probably the one area to continue emphasis as you move forward in the years ahead. Communication, again, more neutral here. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing a good job, but people are okay in a lot of cases with what they are getting. There's not a lot of dissatisfaction. You see the most dissatisfaction has to do with your NBTV programming and the information that people get on budget issues, but that's not that unusual. You've made some real strides in your website. When I was here last time, I mentioned that comparatively that was kind of a surprise for me. It's up 17 points compared to 2.5 years ago. Also, the Information City Manager's newsletter is up 10 points from a couple years ago. And when you see how you stack up, a couple years ago you're actually trailing the national average on the city's website. You're now significantly above both the state and the national. And your overall efforts to keep folks informed at 65% is double-digit percentage points above both the state and the national average. The one area you're doing a little better on when you see is your cable programming, but you can see that still lags behind other communities. So I think you're on the right direction, particularly with your websites. And most people, interestingly, in this community get their information from the local newspaper. That's a trend that's been changing a lot the last couple of years, but here in Newport Beach, 2 out of 3 people are getting their information from the local newspaper, while that's declined nationally as a source in most communities. When it comes to maintenance issues, you can see this is oftentimes one of the areas that people, at the end of the day, assess the quality of the value for their dollars and so forth, is how well you take care of your infrastructure. You didn't have one area that had more than 10% negativity among those who had an opinion. And you can see when you look at how things have changed to a couple years ago, there was a significant improvement in the adequacy of street lighting, and that may be tied to some of the commercial perceptions of improved safety in commercial and business areas we saw earlier on the safety slides. And when you see how you stack up on the condition of maintenance, every single area rated at least 15 percentage points above the state and national average, so you're doing extremely well in all the areas.
Did those, the state and national averages, did they go down, up, or are they the
Actually,
same?
they have gone. I should point out, yeah, the national survey was done in April or March of 2009. We expect it to be lower next year because over the last couple years, and this is really an anomaly. I didn't point out as part of this process, but you'll see it in the report. We actually showed the index here compared to how things have changed nationally. And the national average has really dropped the last 2.5 years significantly in some cases. So the fact that you increased in an era when most people's opinions of local government have gone down because of tight budget resources is really a significant accomplishment. And you can see when it comes to your major streets, your neighborhood streets, and even your sidewalks generally get good ratings throughout the city, though they're more intensely positive in some areas than others. The one unique finding that is a first for me doing these kind of surveys is your cleanliness of city beaches is your #1 maintenance priority. And 9 out of 10 communities, it tends to be streets. But clearly, you're doing a good job in streets, and people probably see this as an important asset. And that's the one area you see still all the items were medium priorities, but the relative importance, the important satisfaction rating for city beaches was about twice or a little over twice any of the other items that were rated. And you can see it's the item that's in the bottom right foremost of this chart here. So at the end of the day, your customer service ratings are extremely good. I'm not going to go through all of these. I mentioned your overall ratings before. But compared to other communities, pretty much in every area that was assessed, you've got employees doing good things. Residents who have contacted them generally feel good about the service they receive. And you can see the overall ratings for customer service are pretty high throughout the city. So just to summarize things, you're setting the standard really among most of the communities in which we conduct our research. You were above average in 52 of 53 areas, and you can see there were 3 areas that you actually set new highs among literally over 200 and some communities in our database. You have the highest rated area in your enforcement of local traffic laws, street lighting, and the condition of your major streets. Clearly, the community thinks you're moving in the right direction, as seen by the overall change in your ratings and the improvement in the composite index. And you can see some of the areas that had the significant or most significant improvement were your website, planning for growth, enforcement of exterior, enforcement of codes for commercial property, and also your outdoor athletic fields. All of those items improved by more than 12% compared to the last survey. But at the end of the day, I know this is a good opportunity for you to do kind of a gut check of how things are doing, how well you're delivering services. These are things I would at least kind of pay attention to as you move forward. Traffic flow I don't consider to be a major problem now, but it's certainly something that you don't want to get worse. And so that's something to keep at the forefront. And then you can see addressing the frequency of patrols doesn't mean you have to do that more often, but be aware that that's one area that residents are more sensitive to. Walking and biking trails and paths, keeping those up. Taking a look at the debris on private property, making sure that you're on top of that, and then the overall cleanliness of your city beaches. All areas rate well now, so I think you're fairly healthy, but these are items that were particularly important, and the overall satisfaction levels were a little lower. So with that, overall, this is one of the few times I get this year to come in and actually give positive news. Frankly, most of the communities I've gone to in the last year, I've had to be the bearer of bad news based on budget reductions and difficult times. So I don't know if you have any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive report. You wouldn't know it's the same city based on some of the campaign mail you see out there, but I think the citizens have indicated what they appreciate what we're doing here. Are there any questions for the presenter? Mr. Hen.
Just one quick one. How many of these surveys have you done? How many cities have you surveyed in the last 12 months, roughly?
I would say 150 to 175.
And where does Newport Beach stack up versus that entire list?
Yeah, I got that question earlier today. You'll be probably in the top 10, I would guess. I know Tempe is another high performer. I'll go through the list, but that was one of the questions staff I had earlier today. And that's one of the things I'll take a look to see kind of where you overall rate compared to some of those other communities.
Thank you. You know, before I open it up to public comments, one of the issues in our first of all, this is very important for the city. We take these surveys seriously. We respond to the results. And we're very gratified to see that we have, in fact, made progress from the 2007 survey. You know, it is axiomatic that what gets measured gets managed and gets focused upon. And I think we've seen evidence of that between the 2007 and the 2010 survey. And I'm, for one, very pleased. And I want to commend our city staff for making this happen because it's a result of their good efforts. You know, one of the issues that we identified in 2007 was the need to have a more customer-friendly development services program, and I see Joel Fick in the audience, and maybe I just stop here and give Dave the opportunity to introduce Joel to the council. I know that we've done that before because, you know, part of his being here is to improve the customer experience by people dealing with our building and planning departments. And that's something that's a high priority, I know, to the entire council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Let me do that. Let me introduce to you Joel Fick. And Joel, this will be a surprise to you, but I do this. You want to come up and just give a 90-second version of your background. Joel comes to us as a retiree, but from the city of Anaheim, and I'll let Joel introduce himself and tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, Mayor Curry, members of the City Council. I'm Joel Fick, and I joined the Newport Beach team last week as your interim community development director. Really honored and happy to be here. I was asked by the city manager and assistant city manager to come here and assist them in taking a look and evaluating the streamlining opportunities with the planning and building departments, and certainly to take a look at customer service and enhance that aspect within those departments. You obviously have a tremendous city, highest marks I've ever personally seen with reviews like this, and I think this is another example of me being asked to come in and assist your city and move the bar even higher. So I'm very honored to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I have had the privilege of working with Joel in Anaheim, and I know he brings a great amount of talent and skill to this job, and we're expecting great things. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Let me now open this issue up to the audience. Does anyone wish to comment on the presentation? Please come to the podium. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, Tom Olson, Corona Del Mar. Mr. Mayor, councilors, how long do I have?
Can we do 3 minutes? Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
A compliment on the presentation. The data are very good, and I know from having scrubbed it, they're very favorable. But I have major reservations about the way data, the way they're being taken and used as absolutes. What's wrong with that? They mean nothing. An absolute number as a percentage satisfied can be changed instantly. I can get you a high rating on tooth extraction by taking a scale and creating extreme satisfaction, very good, very satisfied, satisfied, just satisfied, dissatisfied. I'll get you a very high rating. God didn't give us a scale, neither did Newton. We made it ourselves. In much of corporate America, they have performance reviews which go from outstanding, excellent, satisfactory plus satisfactory. If you're satisfactory, you're almost baked. That's the worst thing can happen to you to be satisfactory. So what we make of them. Now, this is a benchmarking survey. It should be used for benchmarking. We have some excellent data on 37 other cities. The only way to look at this is in comparison with them. The difference between the two. When you do that, you get some strange findings. For example, quality of life in Newport Beach has gone up by 4 points. That's not significant. The other cities went up by 7 points. So we've gone down 3 relatively. What does it mean? Nothing. Ignore it. Go to the ones where we have a comparative advantage. Then everything that's wrong, excuse me, there's always something wrong in the survey is canceled out. Nancy asked the question about don't knows, very important one. By excluding them, we find that 86% of people applaud the, let us say, very satisfied and satisfied speed of police response. But 21% didn't have an answer. So really it's 68%, inflated because we changed the denominator. So what you have to do is go to the variances and not obsess with how many percent this, how many percent that, how many other, because it absolutely means nothing. I did have a very interesting meeting this afternoon with Dave Kiff, and I compliment you for inviting me to that, and Chris and Tara. I left with them a package, and we discussed it thoroughly. And if I may I submit this package to the council? I didn't know this meeting was going to occur, but it would be useful. What I've done here is take the raw data, which is all you have. Remember, raw data are the bricks and mortar and glass and wood with which you construct the house, but not the house. I've taken the raw data, which is all this is, and analyzed it step by step. Step one, comparatively to other cities in 2008. Second, the same comparison in 2010. Thirdly, the change between those. I've summarized them with words at the end without any numbers. Highly favorable. The irony is it looks better that way, even better. Thank you.
Just a minute. Tom, do you think that I mean, how we're going to use this as far as focusing on areas where we do see the gaps and everything is a sensible way to approach it?
Yes, it is. There's an operational side to it, which I don't get into. That's entirely your issue to do with feasibility, cost, law, policy, all kinds of things like that. But from a consumer point of view, my concern is that the people who pay for it, people who participated in it, need to know what happened. By the way, they'd be very interested to know what happened, but they don't want to see numbers. If they do, they're going to be misled. They want to hear, where are we better than I expected, very better than other cities, very good, very bad. I would recommend, and I have recommended, that ETC put together a professional analysis, interpretation, that be sent out by means of, say, a newsletter over the mayor's name. Then he doesn't have to wing it, he doesn't have to take responsibility. It will be convincing, easy to understand, and supportable with technical fact. That's what I think it should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate, by the way, your efforts to hold our feet to the fire on this from the very beginning of this process, and we hope we've tried to reflect some of the guidance you've given us on this.
No, 2 years ago, Keith.
2 years ago, exactly. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Would you like to make any, Chris, do you have any comments on any of this? Just
Oh, I just think it's a really pleasure. We met with Tom today. I think the packet that he submitted to you is right on target. I've looked at his recommendations, analysis. I think it's good, and I think he genuinely wants to help the city be a better place, and I think that's where his heart is, and it's very rare that I run into communities that have somebody that get involved like that, so I think he's done an admirable job making sure that we're accountable, because frankly, you need to hold us accountable, make sure we do a good job so your residents get good value for their taxes.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any other speakers on this subject? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Hinton.
Yeah, so this is really great. Despite Tom's comments, I think there is a lot of good news in this survey. I see two uses for it, actually, one to benchmark and the other to analyze trends. And we can validly analyze trends. What I would really like staff to do is two things. I certainly agree that we need to do a good job communicating this to the citizenry, and I actually like the idea of having a professional do that as opposed to us trying to do that, perhaps working with Tara to make that happen. But secondly, and this is the most important thing, it's fine to get all these great results. I'm very gratified to get them. The staff has worked hard to earn them. The real issue is, what do we do about them? And so the last couple of slides that you put up, I think, are the really critical slides in all of this. And I would ask that staff come back with a look, take some time, have a look at those 5 or 6 critical items that are in the last slide or two that you presented, and come back to us with any recommendations that you might have about how we can really, in a real rifle shot way, get better, because I truly believe if we're not getting better, we're getting worse. And as good as these results are, we need to always strive to be better. So I very much appreciate staff's views, not on the whole darn thing, but focus it on those 5 or 6 things that could really move the needle in the next report.
Councilman Carter?
Will you be giving us copies of Tom's report, come in our packet or something?
Yes, I reviewed them with Tom, and we'll make you copies because I think he does have a good way of portraying that variance, which is helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Good job. Thank you. All right, next item, let's go to the solar energy system installations presentation.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, council members, Jim Campbell will make this presentation, and for folks in the audience that may be here for that, I see Amy. We do have an opportunity for public comment at the conclusion of this, and we did save it for 4 o'clock per Mr. Selich's request. So we're a little late, but keeping on time there.
I'm going to go ahead and present here if I can.
You're gonna
If you don't mind, Mr. City Manager. Mayor Curry, members of the council, today I just want to go over solar energy system installations and the ability for the city to regulate them. Solar Rights Act was originally adopted in 1978. It did provide solar rights protection, but in 2005 there was a significant amendment that really hampered the city's ability to change or regulate solar energy installations. The Act really is there to promote solar panel installations as well as to provide limits on the regulatory authority of local jurisdictions.
Jim, does that 2005 amendment apply to the Coastal Commission as well as the city?
It applies to cities and counties. It doesn't apply to the Coastal Commission. The Act also does apply to homeowners associations. That also limits their ability to review them. They can actually make some modifications to them as long as it doesn't reduce the overall efficiency by more than 20%. But back to the city regulations, what the law does is it requires that we do this with administrative review. It also limits our ability to regulate them based on the determination of the building official that all health and safety issues are addressed. So in a nutshell, that means that they have to pass muster with the building code. The city cannot regulate aesthetics. It was the intent of the legislature that local agencies not adopt ordinances that create unreasonable barriers to the installation of solar energy installations, including but not limited to design and review for aesthetic purposes. That's directly out of the directly out of the Solar Rights Act. Options. Today, what we do is an administrative review at the front counter. We make sure that it adheres to any health and safety regulations. The building official goes through their standard review, make sure it complies with applicable codes, and those permits are issued administratively. The Act does provide one option for discretionary review, and that's for a use permit if there's a good faith belief that there would be a health and safety impact that couldn't be mitigated. But in that respect, the city actually has to approve that project. They can only deny it if there actually is an unmitigated health and safety impact. So that's the only area where we can actually have a use permit. Again, health and safety. Excuse me. Another option is we can actually provide those regulations within our codes. So if there is a reasonable good faith that there could be an impact, we could provide that review. That review isn't necessarily going to be satisfying to the community. I think, as you all know, we've had a recent installation in the community that for aesthetic reasons, a lot of folks are unhappy with that. But I think that use permit might provide the community with the belief that we could control these in some aesthetic way, and we can't. One of the options that we came up with, and we're looking at other jurisdictions, how they've addressed this issue is using voluntary standards and providing incentives for compliance with those voluntary standards. A variety of communities have come up with some pictures and booklets that indicate what the proper way to do it is and the improper way to do it is. A lot of those are based upon aesthetics, but they're providing incentives for compliance with that, and it's a voluntary program. That's one opportunity that we can do. And in fact, that would be our recommendation is if we want to provide that kind of booklet on what we believe to be appropriate for the community, we can provide those guidelines, provide a level of some form of incentive that they comply with those. But kind of wrap this up, the key thing on the Solar Rights Act is that we can't unreasonably restrict the ability for these installations to come forward. Health and safety is really our only area where we can regulate them. So regulations that are currently on the books or proposed in the future that touch upon these installations have to have a basis to avoid a health and safety impact. So we can actually require them to provide proper setbacks so that emergency personnel can get around it. I would think if we were to block access to the roof of the building or to a setback area where emergency access would not be provided, I think we can provide regulations in that area. We can also provide regulations to avoid a sight distance issue, maybe at a driveway where you actually you don't have visibility. I think we can go there. But if you're looking at building heights, a lot of times we want to put these up on the buildings and up on the roofs, and a lot of times our houses are built directly to the height limit. Having these on the roof is not necessarily based on health and safety, and so I think what we need to be mindful of is as we go forward here, whatever system that we come up with, we really have to be focusing on health and safety so that we're implementing state law.
Just a question on Santa Monica. Ground-mounted systems, I know that's obviously different than just something on a roof, but they have height requirements. So how are they able to do something like that, which is not, I wouldn't think, a health and safety issue?
Well, what we found in their ordinance is that they actually relaxed their standards to promote them, which is what the Solar Rights Act requires or suggests that we do. We go that far to promote them. And so what they did is they relaxed their standards to allow them in areas where they wouldn't otherwise be allowed, but at the same time providing limitations. So they did this for roof-mounted systems, and also they did this for ground-mounted systems. Santa Monica's is, in my opinion, is a little bit on the edge of what you might be able to do. They've created standards for them, and when they don't adhere to those standards, they require architectural review. So I think the incentive there is to avoid a process. You comply with the standards that they've indicated. To our knowledge, that ordinance hasn't been challenged in any respect, but it's on the edge, if you will, from my perspective, looking at the intent of the state legislation only to limit the review of these to the building official's determination of a health and safety issue. So what I would want to do is recommend, if we're going to go forward with any additional regulations beyond what we do today, which today, as I indicated, is an administrative process, that we look at regulations that are solely based in health and safety concerns or health and safety impacts to avoid those. We can go forward with a voluntary program where we can show, from an aesthetic standpoint, what is more appropriate, but again, it would be a voluntary standpoint, and we may be able to provide incentives, reduced fees or reduced processing times and what have you, to incentivize adhering to a set of guidelines. But again, it would be voluntary.
Okay, another question. Glare is considered a health and safety issue, and I'm wondering, I mean, the other things I think you can look at, I mean, emergency access, obviously, that's an easy one to look at. Somebody brings you a plan, and you can, okay, there's so much space here. But glare, wouldn't you have to do a study to determine if there's going to be glare, because the sun is in different angles at different times and everything? So is that, by just with a use permit, do we have enough knowledge on that to approve or disapprove?
From an administrative standpoint, probably no, not without having that kind of a study. And I think at that point in time, we'd have to look at the overall installation to see if we have a good faith belief that there could be an impact. And again, a significant glare to a public right-of-way and to the roadway that might cause an accident. These are concerns that I think that we can explore and regulate, and there may be options for the location of the facility. And I think we can look at that on an administrative level. At least that's what I would suggest. But it would necessitate the creation of a glare study, if you will, taking into account the various sun angles during various times of the year. And that would, if we required that of every application, one might look at that as potentially not promoting solar installations, which, of course, is the intent of the Act. And so I think we have a bigger issue when we're looking at ground-mounted facilities. When they're up on the roof, they're usually on a horizontal surface and tilted up, and there's less opportunity for glare there. One other point I wanted to make is that the manufacturers have looked at this issue, and almost all installations these days are actually coming with a non-reflective or an anti-glare coating, which minimizes the glare to the greatest extent, given the technology today. And it actually improves their efficiency, I understand. So I think what we're going to be seeing in the future is that they're all going to be having that anti-glare coating, and I would expect that. I think the ground-mounted ones, especially if they're located in the setback area where there could be an issue with a public right-of-way, I think that's an area where we can explore.
Thank you. Yeah, I think to your point, Mr. Campbell, is that this is one of those issues sort of like group homes and speed limits, where the state legislature has acted in a way that precludes local government from really being as responsive as perhaps we might to citizen concerns. Mr. Rosansky. Nope. Mr. Selich.
Are you done?
I was going to make one additional point. Now, when this legislation came forward, it was at a time when you couldn't sell your power back to the power company. That change happened after the Solar Rights Act amendment went into place. And so what happened with that is it really creates an incentive to create larger systems. If you could sell the power back more rapidly, you can get a return on your investment more earlier. And so the Solar Rights Act actually doesn't specify the size of the system. It's any system, whether it be commercial, agricultural, or industrial or residential. But if we have larger systems than a property might need, then you've got a much larger facility, if you will. Again, they're going to be able to sell that power back and get a return on their investment. But I was just kind of talking out loud to the team, maybe state law didn't necessarily intend that. I don't know. It really wasn't addressed, but maybe that might be a future change that could be suggested, is that these systems actually are sized appropriately for the facility that they're going to serve, as opposed to having a much larger facility that might actually power a neighborhood. And that's one way maybe to reduce the size of these. So anyway, I just want to make that observation.
Okay. Well, I guess that I'd like to see us take more of the approach that Santa Monica has taken at a minimum. And if we could head in that direction citywide, I think that would be the way to go. I think sometimes we're too timid on these kind of things and tend to let these state dictates guide us too much. I remember when the group home thing first came up, and I was on the planning commission, and we were told we couldn't do use permits. All we could do was reasonable accommodation because the state law required us to do so. And look where we are now. We've got, millions of dollars later and got use permits and development agreements. So, I just think that it's something that we ought to take a more aggressive approach on. That pretty much covers it citywide, but I was thinking before the meeting here, and that's why I asked the question about the Coastal Commission, either through our categorical exclusion order with the Coastal Commission or through an amendment to our local coastal plan, can we require that all solar permits go to the Coastal Commission for a coastal development permit? Now, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to get approved or rejected, but at least it provides a forum that people that are affected by these things can go to a public body and make their feelings known on the situation.
I think we'll take a look at that very closely. I don't have an answer as to whether that can be done, but we can.
I'm looking at the city attorney.
We can look at it.
Certainly, we can provide for that in an LUP, and the Coastal Commission has the responsibility to review for development within the coastal zone. The tricky issue becomes the categorical exemption, and tinkering with that relatively old document. I think we should look really carefully at that.
Well, I'm not suggesting we tinker with it. If there's latitude in the way the exclusion order is presently that we can do that, fine. If not, then just go and amend our LCP and have a requirement in the LCP that they go to the Coastal Commission for a CDP for these solar structures.
But wouldn't that penalize the people living within the coastal zone and leaving the rest of the city not having to do that? That doesn't seem very equitable. I just
well,
want
I don't know that we're going to find complete equity in a situation like this, but it would certainly help in the situation. I mean, the thing that's brought us here is these panels in Irvine Terrace, and it seems to me that if that project went before the Coastal Commission, I seriously doubt it would have been approved.
No, perhaps. I just want to say, as far as the Santa Monica issue, that what you were saying is that they encouraged, and so their argument is, we've made it easier in many ways for solar, but in doing that, we're going to make some requirements as far as demands that we might not make if we weren't pushing it so much. I mean, they're trying to balance it and get both ways.
Yeah, that's my overall take on how Santa Monica structured it. They made it easier. They relaxed their height limitations in exchange for like a review process. And so, again, if it seems to work, it hasn't been challenged to my knowledge, we can explore ways to do that and may provide that promotion, if you will, which is also the intent of the Solar Rights Act, is to promote these installations. So one could be looked at, adhering to both intents with that kind of an approach.
Yeah, I'm not trying to provide a mechanism to discourage them. I'm just trying to provide a way that there's a forum for people that are adversely impacted, or feel they're adversely impacted, can have a voice in the approval process.
Mr. Hamm.
Yeah, I support Councilmember Selich's comments, and also I encourage the idea of having a voluntary guideline that we can distribute, to encourage people to do the right thing, show them what the right thing is, as we believe it, and encourage them to do so as well, including identification of ways to provide incentives.
Okay.
Are we, in that respect, would we want to give something? I mean, you get a real benefit by following the guidelines. You get to go to the front of the line or whatever, rather than just giving guidelines and saying, here they are. Usually you want to motivate people, and we might create something like that. I don't know what Santa Barbara has done, for example, but I'd like us to look at that as well.
Well, that's what I meant by incentives.
Oh, okay.
To identify ways that we can benefit people and provide encouragement for them to follow the voluntary guidelines. I think that's a good way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Let me open this to the public. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. State your name, please, for 3 minutes.
My name is Robert Olson, 351 East Bayfront. I live directly across the zones. I'm happy to see that council is taking this up. It's an important matter, certainly to our community. I've actually had the pleasure of meeting with Mr. Selleck, our city attorney and city manager. And I think there's a bit of frustration amongst everyone's part simply because of what's happened. And I think in retrospect, had some things been in place in our city, I think frankly we wouldn't end up with what we have on Bayside Drive. And that is essentially a mirror that's, and if you guys, everybody's seen it, everybody's driven by it. I live across the bayfront from it. Literally, that panel faces our front of our house and right into our living room. And there's a glare on it. And I have heard that even the bars on the solar system have glare, and it shines into our house starting at about 3:30 in the afternoon and going on until the sun sets. That, to me, is certainly a public nuisance, and one could argue that it's a public safety and health. But, I mean, I think the reality of it is that, yeah, while it would be inequitable relative to everyone to have to go to Coastal Commission, in this instance, this broadcasts across most of Balboa Island. And I can tell you that our neighbors aren't happy. The people who live on Bayside Drive aren't happy. And, it's what we call solar blight, a solar farm in our own backyard. And the sad thing is that we all support solar. We like it. We like the fact that it's a renewable resource. I'm in the business myself, and we use it wherever we can. The sad thing is this could have easily gone on the roof had a system been in place to stop this, to say, one, we're going to have Coastal sign off on this. That alone would get someone to the table to say, geez, do I want to go through Coastal? It's going to take me 6 months. Or do I just negotiate here and put it on the roof? And really, they would have ended up with the same system. Nobody was here to cut them out of having solar. We just want something that fits in our community. I think that's a reasonable position to have. So that's it. I'd love to talk with anybody afterwards, but appreciate your time.
Thanks for coming down. Any other speakers, please come forward. State your name, please.
My name is Joe Silvoso. I live in Irvine Terrace, and I'm the president of the Homeowner Association over Irvine Terrace. And we've lived this issue not only with the ones on Bayside, but the ones going on roof. If you're well aware of Irvine Terrace, we have a 14-foot height limit. Going through 23, lived that the last 2 to 3 years, we couldn't limit somebody below 14 foot if they wanted to go up 16 or 17 foot underneath that law. Our neighbor who put those panels did come to us to get them approved. Our architectural committee denied them based on our CC&Rs and our architectural guidelines. It was appealed to the board. He worked with us. We found very quickly that there was very little, if anything, we could do. We talked about the rooftop. He presented reports that the amount of energy he needed to produce to do everything he was doing in his home would have reduced his efficiency by 20%. So we were dead in the water there. He did. There was going to be a silver, and I'm not going to be here to support him, but one of the things that we thought, and we reached out, and to our knowledge, no action was taken. We reached out to the California Coastal Commission. They're very aggressive in protecting the coastlines, bluffs, terraces along the hillsides, and the issue that we have here, and because of our exclusion, But we just wanted to bring it to their knowledge, be the commission versus, we have 2 state laws, who controls versus the solar panels on a bluff and building on a bluff that would ruin that. We got no response, whether no callback, anything, but I would encourage the city, if it doesn't cause an exclusion, because we're very happy with that exclusion we have, if it doesn't cause a problem with that, the city, they may listen to you more than they did to a homeowner association. There's a love-hate relationship with homeowners. They love us in our community when they need something. They hate us when we enforce the CCNRs. But I would encourage you, if you could, and I don't see that as discriminatory. I just look at that as another vehicle for the city to protect the health and welfare in this wonderful city that we live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Council. My name's John Petrie. My wife and I live at 1239 Bayside Drive, and the driveway entrance to our 4 units drives right out immediately into the direct site of the solar panel that we're specifically talking about right now. And I understand I dealt with the city when they were first starting construction and was invited to review the state codes and did so. And I understand that with respect to your ability to address a number of these issues, you feel your hands are tied. I would request that you, and I think Mr. Selleck suggested this, and I would request that the city take a little more aggressive posture with respect to the state, perhaps go invite the assemblyman who sponsored it or whatever, but in any event, show them what, I mean, we're all experienced or have experienced good intentions that have negative consequences. And this, at least from an aesthetic standpoint, is one of those. The specific installation is just one. You can imagine what would happen if all of a sudden the entire Irvine Terrace slope was covered with panels like that. I'm surprised the Irvine Company hasn't taken some steps in dealing with the state on this, as you imagine the rather negative impact from an aesthetic standpoint, again, that this type of installation would have all along Newport Coast if every slope had a tennis court-sized black screen on it. Again, we appreciate, what you have done. I think that we understand that it's a little difficult here. We would like to ask, and perhaps with Ed's direction, whether or not there's any type of community trees that could be planted along the right-of-way on Bayside Drive. There are a number of them along there. I believe there's a setback of some respect or some distance that belongs to the city. I expect that between the residents of Balboa Island and those along Irvine Terrace and certainly Bayside Drive, that we could possibly raise some money to plant some trees that would not have a negative impact on on this facility's efficiency, but would create somewhat of a barrier, a little bit more of a transition. I know you can't require, I think it was, whatever it was, a relatively small amount of aesthetic surcharge could be placed on it. But I think that there, on a voluntary basis, people would be willing to do that. And I just appreciate if there's an opportunity to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming down. Any other speakers on this matter? All right, then let me bring back the council. Councilmember Gardner.
Mr. City Attorney, one of the people who testified said there's a tremendous amount of glare. Are we just dead in the water now, or is there anything that we could require to at least minimize it?
No, I don't think we're dead in the water. I was going to talk to Mr. Olson afterwards and see if I could make an appointment to go visit his house somewhere between 3:30 and sunset and take a look at what's going on there. I do think glare can create specific health and safety issues. I think glare gets tricky on that. That's the largest area where we've been looking at is glare with respect to these matters. What we've been able to determine with the great help of planning is that most of these panels are developed in a manner in which the glare is minimized because they want to retain the sun, because that's where their power comes from. But I do think glare is certainly a place that we can explore for greater regulation, and particularly with respect to direct impact on other homes, like it's happening with Mr. Olson. So if I can get Mr. Olson's contact information, I can follow up with that.
Thank you. All right, I think staff, Mr. Selich?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say, but I think staff probably has a pretty good sense of direction.
Yes, sir.
Council, since I'd expect that you want our office involved, let me just make sure I understand the direction. To take the most aggressive or assertive approach as we can under state law and draft an ordinance that's consistent with state law but takes all the water out. prepare voluntary guidelines, evaluate and make recommendations regarding incentives. I think that's what you're telling us, evaluate glare and see what we can do with respect to that health and safety issue. And I want to know how long we have to get it done. If you allow me to ask that, can we bring it back to you in 3 months, say in January?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine. Well, one other thing, look into the Coastal Commission.
Coastal Commission, I apologize. Yes, that's the Coastal Commission issue.
Let me get a sense from you, too, about the trees. I'd need to look into that a little bit more as to whether or not that's even a plantable area.
Well, I think it's an interesting idea. I guess the thing that I'd be concerned about is that, what can we do that we don't
They're going to be
adversely
tops
affect
someday.
the panels, I think, would be penalized for that.
Yeah.
So maybe you and I can go out and take a look at it and see what we can do, come up with there.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, Mr. Hunt, I think you took very good and copious notes. Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move on to the next item, which is the Quest demonstration presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. This one on its face, I don't want you to tune out and say, oh, what is this? What is the city staff trying to show me? This is a continuation of our customer service effort, and I hope if you're watching from home and or as council members, you'll benefit from at least two things here. One is to understand a new way of tracking requests that come in, and a citizen can submit it just as well as a council member to make sure that it did indeed get followed up on. You can be very specific about that request. The second component of it is something I know the council's been interested in looking at, and that is how can we all know better, your council especially, know better as to where specific projects are with staff, how much money has been spent, what's the calendar for it, who are the lead staff members, sort of where is Eelgrass, for instance, where is the Ryan Wharf in terms of those projects that you've asked us. So I've asked Jackie and Avery to pull together a brief presentation on this. And again, if you're watching from home, please pull out your pencil because this can benefit you as well. So with that, Jackie.
The Quest system is a citizens request system on project tracking. What is it? It's an online collaboration tool for handling citizens' requests and efficient project tracking. It was developed in-house by IT and the applications group, really by my best developer, web developer, Avery McGlinty, that is sitting over here behind me. We know that we are doing better in customer satisfaction. We know our website is better, it's 17% better. We know we are communicating better. We know that we're doing better customer service. So why are we doing it online? A lot of it. 72% of most of our citizens are under 55, so they like to use the web. So we know that if we look at the Pew Internet Research, we know that every group is going up on the web. But I think that the interesting is over 65, look, is steep going up. So even our older citizens are going on the web to require communication from us. 74% of all older adults use the internet to communicate. This is our customer service, our online service request. You go to online services, you go to customers requests, and this is where you get. It was, as I said, developed in-house by our group. It is now has categories because we have so many requests in the system. We have over 106 requests in the system. So if you go, the one that I'm in here, for example, Beach and Parks, you get all these different type of requests that you can do with very little effort. But we have, as you see, change of address, document imaging requests, fire and hazards, graffiti, harbor resources. We have over 10 departments using it. So why are we doing it, this access online? We have 24-hour access from our citizens. It is quick response. It's very easy to use. With just a couple clicks, you can get your information. It gets direct feedback to citizens. So you come and you sign up yourself, give us your email address, get your own password, and submit the request. And you can, as soon as it gets updated by the employees, you get an email saying that there has been an update to your request. You can log in and follow through what is going on. It is less process time by staff. It's efficient tracking for the citizens and for us because you can not only track a single request, you can track history on your request. You can track multiple requests at one time. So it's very efficient for both sides. And it's available for performance measurements, and we're all doing that. Even in utilities, they are tracking the hours they are spending in every single request. So very important. The evolution. Quest has been around since 2005. We started with opening and closing water service by the Revenue Division. And we really started where we were spending our time. When somebody comes in the web, somebody wants to open a water service, what do? We have to close the old customer. We have to finalize it. We have to create a work order to find out the final read of water. And that's going to be the initial read for the new customer. So this process was taking a long time. And that's why we decided to put it on the web. We do about 200 to 300 chains of water service a month. And we have about 80% of our customers using it online. The second one that's very labor incentive is business license. It takes 15 minutes if you send us an application for us keying information to do that. And you go from application to payment to getting your business license online. That has been around since 2005. We do about same volume from 200 to 300 a month. And right now they only have to do about 34 of those by hand. Everything else is done on the web. General services requests since 2006, code enforcement. Business license renewal, that's a very, very large. We do about 1,500 of those a month. So if you do it online, you can come with a single click. All you have to do is tell us, do we change employees? Do we have more or less employees? And renew it and pay it online. Charter permits, you can request a charter, and we bill you monthly for as many charters that you had done on the web. Fire hazards. So you can see the history of all the different pieces. The ones with different color, that means that we directly interface from the web into our Community Plus system, our revenue system. So you don't have to do anything. When you do you could do a business license, you're actually creating a business record, an owner's record, a license record, and a fee record, all in one shot from the web. All it needs is review from the Revenue Department, but everything else is done. So I'm going to take you from a very simple request to a more complicated one, a pothole. You come to online services, service requests, and you choose from our maintenance, the street maintenance, and do pothole, and all you have to do is tell us the location of it, and that's it. You get automatically an email telling you that you submitted your request, that we received it. It goes into a queue for a job request. It gets assigned to a crew. The crew goes and fixes it, and it gets updated on the web. You get an email automatically saying it has been updated, and you get your problem fixed. Very simple information. Now, a business license. You want to do business in Newport Beach, you come to the web, you follow a lengthy application that it has about 3 screens. It is very accurate. We get much better information coming directly from you than for us trying to transpose from a paper form into our system. As I say, it takes 15 minutes to process these applications, and we have 83% of people doing it right now. So it goes from application to payment all in one shot. It interfaces to our back-end revenue application, and it creates all the information in here. All they have to do is a weekly batch of issuing the license and mailing it to you. And next time you're ready for renewal, so all you have to do is re-log in with your login and password. Tell us if you change number of employees, and that's it. 83% of the people are doing this. So where are we going? We started, as you saw in 2005, we started with few requests, and we are increasing. We have 106 requests on the web. And we have a list from our city manager that we're adding about 56 new requests. These are some of the new ones that we are doing. One of the places that we would like to go maybe use portable devices. So people that are on the road, they can look at the queue and they can maybe organize their routing a little bit better. We noticed that our youngest employees are really doing this on the phone. That's exactly what we've started to see, that they are using the web so much that they are even trying to look to this Quest system in their tiny little BlackBerry phones. The other thing that we would like to do is really increase awareness on these online systems, because we had them since 2005, and maybe a lot of people are not aware of them. Project tracking is going to be really to track major council initiatives or other projects that come from city council or the city manager, and it provides you a complete quarterly status of budget, time spent, a schedule and milestones in any project. It's all done on the web. On the project, the benefits of project tracking, that is better communication among staff. You actually create a group. You have all the team members in your group in the same project. And you have a central repository of all the project's information. We have a lot of times we're in the middle of a project and somebody leaves the project and you don't have any continuity of what the person was doing, but now you go to that place, you pick up from that staff member, and you're able to continue on. The time tracking of all the aspects of the project, you can go real time and see the status. And finally, file consolidation. Sometimes we email people the same file, 5 different people. Everyone has a copy in their desktop. Now you just go to one central place, and you're able to access all the documents related to a specific project.
Let me take it from here, Jackie, thanks. As you can see, we tried to start to populate this with some of the things that are more important to the council, and I'm going to use the eelgrass as an example, and Chris Miller helped populate this. So this would be something that you'd be able to look at from your own computer, signing in, learning about the description of the process right up here, the goals, objectives, or the metric. In other words, what are we trying to accomplish here? Who are the key department teams? And then what are our milestones? So you can see whether we've met them. It's a good thing to monitor my performance by. And you can see if a resident asks you where exactly this project is, you can point to that. We'll show whether we've slipped behind schedule, where we're ahead of schedule. Down here, you can look at the project budget, what was approved at the time, what's remaining. And then it's going to be the onus is on us, and I take this very seriously, and so will the staff, to give a really aggressive, concise quarterly status update in terms of where we are and what's next. So you can see up here the overall calendar for it, the target completion, and then down here just the update for that quarterly status. So we intend to use this as a tool, again, for just about anything you send our way, because I think it'll help you and it'll help us make sure we stay on schedule. So with that, again, encourage you to use it, encourage the public to use it, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Dave. I hope everybody's recognizing a theme here tonight, and that is customer service and improved customer service, both through our citizen satisfaction survey, our changes at development services with Joel, and now this Quest system, so that we can track your complaints faster and better and get answers, without having to keep them in email and go back and track them down. And I appreciate, Dave, the work you and the staff are doing in this regard. Councilmember Gardner.
I wonder if we could have a general category when you first sign on. I mean, I've gone on to sign on a couple of times, and I had to pick something, and it was like, oh, well, I mean, I had no specific thing in mind. I just wanted to be part of the system.
You just wanted to complain?
Yeah, exactly. And I had to pick one, and it was just like, oh, there's too much to think about, and I wouldn't do it. So maybe it's a general category for people who are going to want to track things but don't know what they want to track.
Dave, it would also be helpful if you could get a little hard copy of how to do this and get it to in the primitive way to the council members, and we will go up the curve on our own tech savviness here.
I'd be happy to do that.
I think that'd be helpful. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. Okay. Seeing none, the next issue is Southern California Edison presentation on plug-in electric vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. We have had a request from Edison to make this presentation. As you hear the presentation, I'll make it very clear to you, this is about accommodating more homes and businesses, arguably, for EVs, electric vehicles, that you can plug in and recharge overnight or while you're working. So with that,
This was so funny because I sent about a week ago, I sent an email to Eddie saying, now, if we have a lot of electric vehicles, are we going to be able to handle it? And he says, oh, we're coming to you right now.
so very timely.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, it was very timely. As a matter of fact, Eddie Marquez, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Council. Thank you as always for having me here this evening. I'm going to introduce my colleague, but following along the same theme, Mr. Mayor, in response to a survey that we conducted, Newport Beach rated in the top 20 in terms of customer interest in electric vehicle transportation. So what I'd like to do in order to discuss electric vehicle readiness, I'd like to introduce Bob Graham, my colleague at Southern California Edison, and he will answer all of the questions regarding plug-in electric vehicles.
In 7 minutes. Clicker, 6.5. Mayor Curry and council members, thank you very much. Our purpose here is to just give you a taste of what's happening with plug-in electric vehicles coming into our service territory and the city of Newport Beach. You are ranked in one of the top 20 cities that will receive plug-in hybrid electric vehicles based upon the number of hybrid vehicles that are already in the community. And we looked at all the cities. We understand exactly where they're coming. We use that data to look at our distribution system and determine if there are any impacts. We currently, it's difficult to see, but currently we're trying to visit all of the cities in our service territory. There's roughly 180 of you. I have personally visited with over 50 cities over the last 3 months as we begin to educate and outreach to the communities and give you some ideas. I think the only real bullet for the public to think about is on the bottom bullet where it says we're the leader in alternative and renewable energy. That means that every time you drive an electric vehicle, every day it rolls down the street, it gets cleaner, because every day we are getting cleaner. We're adding more solar, we're adding more wind systems. So it's a real benefit to drive electric vehicles, and that's the point. And California, especially Southern California, is one of the cleanest areas in the United States, so it's a real benefit. The vehicles are coming. The Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt, you probably have seen the ads. They're arriving. I think the key message for these pictures is to look at the cars and realize these are cars that people buy. These are not toys. These are not things that you wouldn't want to your neighbor to see you riding around in. These are real cars for real people and all classes of people and all income levels. So it's not just for the wealthy green folks, but also everybody else in the community as well. Southern California Edison is really focused on 3 issues. The distribution system. We are very concerned about where the vehicles are going to land on our individual circuits, because if you bought a battery electric vehicle and you required a 240, 40 amp service, and you bought one and your neighbor bought one and he bought one and the next neighbor down the street bought one, if all of you were on the same circuit, that's like adding 3 houses to the same circuit. It's possible then that we would need to upgrade the transformer. So we are, and other parts of the distribution system. We are not at all worried about the generation system. We're not all worried about the transmission system. We have plenty of power at nighttime. We have plenty of power in the morning to charge millions and millions of vehicles, but we are concerned about the local distribution system impact. We communicate with all the auto manufacturers, all the charger manufacturers, and we pretty well know which circuits within our 4,300 circuits are suspect at the moment. And the more we begin to know as when vehicles start to arrive, the better off we'll be to determine which exact circuits. Of interest, there is a lot of circuits on the coastal area where we have homes without air conditioning, where there's a lot of 4 kV circuits that are a concern. So in my case, in living in Manhattan Beach, we have a lot of areas within Manhattan Beach that would be a concern. But we know where that is, and we're planning for it. The second thing is, just as Mayor Curry talked about customer service, we're extremely concerned about the customer has a new paradigm. He's going to drive home with the vehicle. He's now going to have to plug it in versus stopping on the way, filling up with gas, and moving on. That process of understanding what your home looks like today and whether or not it needs an upgrade to getting the permit, to getting the installation, to getting the inspection done, to getting power turned back on, could be as long as 45 days, or it could be 5 days. So things like what you're doing with your Quest system, pretty impressive, is that things like that where somebody can come in and get permits online, or that handheld device that the young lady was talking about. If that device was in the hand of your inspector, who when he did the inspection on the panel upgrade and immediately notified the city and notified the utility at the same time, then we could literally go out that same day and turn the power back on versus waiting until we get a fax or an email in the afternoon and then go back the next day and turn that on.
Then the final thing, which I'll talk a lot about, is customer education and outreach. We are finding that very few people, very few communities are aware and ready for these vehicles that are arriving here the first quarter of next year. So the whole goal in this 10-minute presentation is to begin to get you as a council and also your staff to begin to think about what do we need to do to get ready for these vehicles to arrive, and we're doing an extensive amount of education outreach. We know they're coming. The graph basically says we did an analysis of 36 data points, which includes everything from vehicle announcements to the stimulus money going to battery factories to research being done by independent contractors and consultants. And basically it says that a mid-range by the end of 2014, there'll be approximately 100,000 cars in our service territory across the 6 counties. By 2020, there could be between 500 and 1 million cars. And what does that really mean? Well, if you think about it a little bit, if there's 100,000 cars, and if 25,000 of those cars were looking for a place to charge, and we're looking for public charging, because most people charge at home at night, but they're looking for public charging because they drove a little far, they have range anxiety, they have a concern. If 25,000 cars were looking for a place to park, well, that's roughly 12,000 charge locations would be needed in this 6-county region. Today we have none. So we, between now and the end of 2014, will need to upgrade the existing charge locations and begin adding additional charge locations to get to some reasonable number so that the individuals that buy these vehicles will feel comfortable. Most of the charging will be at home. 90% of charging we expect to be in residentials. The challenge will be in the multifamily units, condos, at condos and apartment complexes, but most of the charging will be at home. There will be some upgrades for chargers. I'll show you that chart in just a second. We think it's very important for businesses, for people driving to work to charge. We're very comfortable with people charging at work because most people arrive at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. By 12 o'clock in the afternoon, they've got a full charge. There's plenty of electricity at nighttime and in the morning, so there's no impact on the transmission and distribution system. And there'll be a lot of governments that are beginning to look at fleets. We have actually taken the first step to buy the battery electric Ford Transit Connect to begin to evaluate that. And it's something you could recommend to the city to do, to take a look at the battery electric vehicle Transit Connect and begin to get a feel for what that might mean in your own internal fleet. We're reaching out to all the state governments. We work with SCAG. We work with all the Council of Governments that we possibly can. I have met with at least 5 so far. SCAG is working with us to develop a regional plan to look at what the infrastructure should look like from 2014 through 2020, and we will be talking to the city about that, because the key to understanding where the infrastructure should go in that period of time is what are the travel destinations. What are your key travel destinations where people are coming and need charging? You don't need charging everywhere. And the other message I would give you is to be cautious about the level of charging you insert into the city. Look at your travel destinations. Look at where you had chargers in the past. Don't get carried away and put a lot of chargers in, because most people won't need them, and you need to be part of a study to understand what that is. So be careful with that decision. There are some AB 118 funding available. 3 companies have been given funds to put public chargers in. You can reach out to those. We'd be happy to give you that information. So we're beginning to be as aggressive as we can to provide data for you. Some people don't even realize, and since this is public and maybe you don't realize the differences, a battery-powered electric vehicle runs on all electricity. It charges on, typically will charge on a 240 40-amp service, which probably requires, in most cases, upgrade to your panel. Mostly will be used for running around town and for commuter cars. A 100-mile range is pretty well what most people drive. In fact, about 80% of Americans drive less than 40 miles a day, so it pretty much covers everybody. A plug-in hybrid vehicle is a hybrid vehicle with a larger battery. The best way to think about that, if you had a plug-in hybrid vehicle, if you're driving at under 35 miles an hour, you'd be an electric vehicle. If you're above 35 miles an hour, you'd be a hybrid vehicle. Let me give you an example of what that means in real terms. If you had a hybrid, if you had an internal combustion Escape, Ford Escape today, they're a small SUV, you'd get between 19 and 20 miles to the gallon. If you bought that Escape as a hybrid vehicle, you get between 28 and 32 miles to the gallon. That same vehicle with 20 miles all-electric range as a plug-in hybrid vehicle gets 60 miles to the gallon. So you just double the mileage by adding a pretty small battery pack to give you 20 miles of all-electric range. So it's pretty important. It's a big debate over which of these vehicles will dominate the market. One vehicle allows you, the plug-in hybrid, you can pick up that car and drive to New York without any issues. You can fill up on any service station on the way there and back. A battery electric vehicle, you would need a charger, so most of those will be local. We are being very progressive and allowing people, doing a lot of education outreach. We were at the LA Auto Show last year. We're going to be at the LA Auto Show this year. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're in every media location we possibly can. I've told you about all the presentations I've given. We have the ability to, and I think you may have already done this, and if you haven't, I urge you to take a look at it, to combine our website with your website to give you full access to this information. Your website's very impressive, and we can just add value to that. The information that we provide, the fact sheets, are fully downloadable. We're basically saying to a city, you could put a kiosk out in your front door, out in your front lobby, and you'd be have all the electric vehicle information you would need for your constituents. We have videos that you can put on your TV channels. We have 3 vignettes we developed that are available free for download from the website. So bottom line is we're working with most of the cities and all the cities to look at the streamlining the process. We're looking at what we can do internally to improve our process. Based on what I saw today, you're moving in the right direction. In fact, you're probably already there. In fact, most cities are in terms of same-day permits and next-day inspection. We're doing a lot of education outreach I just talked about. We're willing to talk to you and to staff about what the real needs are going to be for public charging infrastructure. Again, I urge caution to not rush into that. Let's make sure it's done wisely. We don't need stranded assets. And then eventually we'll be looking and working through the state for new building codes and standards to try to make sure that when new buildings are built, that those buildings are electric transportation capable. And that's it.
Thank you, Bob. Excellent presentation. Bob and I actually worked together 27 years ago in the transportation business, and he brings a lot of skill to this effort at Southern California Edison. And this is another thing that I think the city ought to be involved in because it gives options to our residents. It adds value in the community, and it helps our residents save money. So I appreciate Edison's partnership and moving in that direction. Are there any questions?
You should take a little more credit for what you did. Your mayor was actually involved in helping develop the first hybrid-powered vehicle ever built in the United States, funded by the Federal Transit Administration. So you actually can give him a couple of kudos for that. We were younger then.
We were. Any questions? All right. Thank you, Bob, very much.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank you.
that. Is there any member of the audience who'd like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. Thank you. Okay, the last item is the cost of services study on harbor fees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. So this is the first of a couple of different items that you'll see. This is the last one for a study session. You've packed a lot of material into this. And what we wanted to look at with this section of our review of harbor fees was things that are charged based on the cost of providing that service. So tonight won't be about moorings, won't be about commercial or residential piers. And looking around in the audience, I'm seeing a very sincere lack of interest in this, which I think is a good thing. Maybe we did something right. No? But with that, I'm going to introduce Tracy McCraner to offer some thoughts on to make this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. To my left is Mike Adams. He's the consultant that we've hired. He works with MGT to do our cost allocation plan, and then specifically the Harbor Resources cost of services. And then to his left is Shannon from Harbor Resources. So we wanted to give the background on the harbor fees. We are still using our 1996 study that was performed by KPMG. That was the last comprehensive cost of service study performed and still being used today. In 2007, we did get a report from Maximus, Inc. on Harbor Resources cost of services. It was criticized by stakeholders and subsequently not adopted by the city. So last April, City entered into an agreement with MGT. They do our cost allocation plan, and then we've added a scope of services to look specifically at our cost of services studies. And this year, we focused on harbor resources and police, and today we're going to talk about that harbor resources study. October 20th, I went ahead and sent a draft of this harbor resources staff report and backup to interested parties that we've been working with on various harbor projects, and invited any comments from them. I have not heard back from them, and then tonight we are here to talk about those fees. What are the components of the harbor fees? Well, first there's the direct salaries and benefits. Mike met with all the Harbor Resources staff, and they went through, there's 5.5, I believe, total staff. Okay. And they went through all of their activities and identified all direct staff time spent on projects. That's all projects, both fee-related as well as non-fee-related projects. And they divvied up their hours per year spent on direct time. Then there's the indirect costs. So all the other time not specifically spent on a direct activity is their indirect activities. And that includes not only vacations and holidays and annual leave, but all their time spent on supervision, administration, calling back people, everything that's not directly attributed to an activity. Then there's also indirect costs related to supplies, materials, and utilities. That would be rent, photocopying, Xeroxing, things like that. Another element of indirect costs is our citywide overhead. Now, this is for the central service departments, such as mine, admin services, city clerk, city attorney, city manager. This citywide overhead is calculated by Mike. That's called the cost allocation plan, and then that's allocated to all city departments, not just Harbor Resources, but they do get a share based on a variety of allocation basis, and we also attach those allocation basis to the back of the staff report so that you could see. But for instance, admin services, we have time associated with payroll, budget, and IT, and those have different allocation basis to all city departments. Personnel, they get allocated based on recruiting, training, employee relations. We also wanted to point out that these are central service departments. There are no costs associated with the operating departments such as fire, lifeguard, police, or trash pickup included as part of this allocation plan. The final piece or component of the harbor fees is the direct materials. There's only one that applies to Harbor Resources, and it's a Regional General Permit, or RGP. This is required to be paid to the Coastal Commission and the Army Corps of Engineers for allowing dredging and plan check services within our city. It's $580,000 for 10 years, so we did an allocation of $58,000 towards those three types of fees. Not all dredging is fee-based. There's some city dredging projects, so instead of $58,000 allocated each year, it was about $50,000 after we took the city costs out. So the process, and this is the same process used for any cost of service study, but the first step is to look at departmental salaries and benefits and determine, again, if they're direct or indirect. So Mike meets with the staff, and they determine which is direct. And, of course, direct can be both fee-related as well as non-fee related. Then we look at the department maintenance and operating expenses, any capital outlay. The majority of these costs are actually excluded altogether because they're for non-fee related activities. But of the remaining 26% of these general maintenance and operations, then we determine if they're direct or indirect. The majority of those are indirect. The only direct materials, basically contract cost, is that RGP permit that we discussed on the last slide. The overhead rates are then calculated. Overhead rates are simply a ratio of your indirect costs divided by just your direct salaries and benefits. And then you come up with your overhead rate. Those overhead rates are then applied to the hourly salary and benefit amounts to determine a full cost rate. So in our example down there, Harbor Resources Manager, his salary and benefits, that's his direct cost. The internal department administration, that's the indirect costs of the department. So basically all of his indirect salaries added with his indirect supplies and materials, and then those indirect costs are divided by, again, direct salaries. And that percentage, which was about 70% for the Harbor Resources Department, is then applied to his direct salary and benefit calc. And then the citywide support, again, that's the overhead for all the core central service departments citywide. And so that's how we get their full cost rate. Then we need to gather the time estimates that reflect the average amount of time required to provide a fee service. So again, that's after working with the Harbor Resources staff. For instance, how much time do you spend in a year on the dredging projects? And then that average annual time is then applied to the full cost. So apply the hourly rates to the time estimates to determine the base cost. Now, normally, that's where we would stop, and that would be considered the full cost of providing that service. But in this case, we do have one direct material supplies contract cost. That's this dredging that we're talking about, little less, or about $50,000 a year over the next 10 years will be allocated, but it's only allocated to those 3 fee-specific services. So the dredging gets about 2/3, the other third goes towards the plan check services. So the staff's full cost is added to their share of the dredging, or of the RGP direct costs, and that equals the full cost of performing that service. Then that full cost is simply divided by the total annual volume, or the number of permits pulled, or the number of services performed for that year, and that equals the fee. Then we have to go to our Muni Code, because we have an approved cost recovery percentage in Muni Code 3.36030, and basically the Muni Code says we should be full cost recovery, or 100%, except for these exceptions, which is in the appendix, and only one of the harbor-related fees has an exception to that percentage, and that would be the tide pool rangers, or I think it's called Marine Preserves Tour. Sorry, that's small. It's number 4 there. And council has approved a subsidy of 85% for that tide pool program. So we are, by Muni Code, only charging out a fee of equal to 15% of that full cost. So that comes to what is recommended by this council, or by our consultant. If all of these recommendations were put in place, as the staff report pointed out, we did have 3 fees, and this it hasn't been looked at since 1996. 3 fees actually decreased. The remainder increased, and we had 1 new fee, which was for eelgrass. And that's not a new service being provided, but it was a recommendation by the consultant. Is we normally have the vendors contract out for the eelgrass surveys, but we did have a fee calculated in case we did take that internally. So if when we come back to council with our cost of service recommendations, if this council approves those recommendations as is, it would estimate approximately for all fees, for all activity, about $64,000 of additional revenue per year. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Carter.
2 questions. The RGP, have we ever challenged that amount, since we don't seem to get to do much dredging? We're paying for them to tell us that we can't dredge most of the time? Yeah?
My name is Chris Miller, the Harbor Resources Manager. Actually, most of that cost is for the testing. So it's the upfront costs we use in testing, and then, of course, we are charged a fee to apply to the agencies on a project-by-project basis.
All right. And the second question is, on the eelgrass and taking it internally, are we putting ourselves in competition with private enterprise that way, local businesses?
That is a little bit of the reason why we got out of it. We used to do it quite often, 6, 7, 8, and many years previous to that. But we were limited by boat-based surveys, which means we had to go during daylight hours, during normal working hours, and during certain tides. That became very restrictive to most of the applicants, and they decided to just go ahead and hire their own diver who could dive at any time in tide. And then we realized, I think we should let that segment take care of their own surveys. And we decided that about 3+ years ago. And we haven't done any eelgrass surveys except for ours, for our projects. And occasionally when they need a second opinion, we'll help out. But it's very rare.
And this is just a fee in case we do have these rare exceptions. It's definitely not recommending we take on more of that activity.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think the thing to note here is, and the point of this is that these fees did not did not come from the sky as manna from heaven. They are the result of a very methodical process that was prescribed, that was scrubbed, and that was done very diligently. And so they reflect the results of that process. Mr. Hannon.
I would add to that this calculation is done in a consistent manner as all other cost of services have been done for the city. And so there's nothing unique or singled out about harbor fees. It's just one aspect of the whole panorama of fees that the city needs to analyze, and in a very consistent way.
Absolutely. Mike also took on the police services, which will come back to you at full council in November. And it's the same process as applied regardless of the fee. It's just the, obviously the breakdown of the personnel, direct versus indirect, will depend, but the process is exactly the same.
Great, thank you. Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. Okay, seeing none, thank you. Very comprehensive report. Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak on a matter not on the agenda? Please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we will adjourn to closed session.